You can turn your Bibles this morning to Psalm chapter 46 as we continue our series called Unstuck. I want to start off the story in the summer of 2015 that this lady named Charity took this family vacation to Montana. And while there, she went on this rafting excursion with her nephew. I guess he was kind of a guide, and so they went on this rafting excursion through the Yellowstone River. And for much of the day, she simply just enjoyed the view surrounding her, the deep blue water that laid before her. When they reach that portion, if you've ever gone whitewater rafting, there's always a portion in the river, though, that when you get there, they'll say, if you want to get out right now and just kind of float down the river, you're more than welcome to go to do that. So, lost a pair of glasses, sunglasses that way one time. Kind of bitter about it. It's been 4 years ago, but it's fine. They were just $5, but they were some good glasses. Somewhere in the Cumberland now. Anyways, when they got to that part of the river, Charity said, they said you can get out and jump in right now. And her kids, without asking any questions, without anything, they just jumped right in. You know how we'll be. But she said, you know what? It's about a high 70-degree day, but the water that morning or that day was about 60 degrees. So you could see why she wasn't eager just to jump right in the water. So she stayed in the boat as she kept drifting down. She's looking at the trees and the nature flying above her, all these different things. And she admits that the whole time she's keeping a watchful eye on everything. As she says, she's watching out for the first signs of hypothermia in her children. She's watching out, afraid that they might be pulled under the current, all of these different things. But after a while, she says her children's glee persuaded her to jump in the water herself because neither were real threats. So she jumped in, and for a while she just enjoyed the calmness of the lazy river. All was going well, peaceful, relaxing. But then she heard her brother call out, warning her, beware of the rapids ahead. She'd go on to later describe the situation, what's going through her mind and her plan of action in this whole thing. And Charity said, and these are her words, she said, at first I thought that we could just climb back into the safety of the raft, but it rushed quickly ahead of us. She said, the last thing I heard my brother say was, whatever you do, stay to the left. And the kids were well behind me and they couldn't hear the warning. She says, I panicked. Would they be pummeled against the rocks? Would they be pulled underwater? As any good mother would begin doing, she did whatever it took to make sure that her children knew what to do. She was shouting out, trying to jump up and do everything to let them know. She tried anything and everything to get closer to her sons. After all, this could be life or death. Yes, she said, I attempted to stand up against the current, but the water kept pushing me down. She said, the more I resisted, the harder I struggled. It isn't that sometimes how life feels for us. For a while, we're going through life. Life's going pretty swell. We're enjoying the current, the lazy current of the river. We're taking in the views of the animals and the beautiful scenery of trees and mountains towering above us. And we're enjoying all of the luxuries and everything that goes along with life. And then out of nowhere, like a smack in the face, comes the heavy current that beats us down. It's pushing and tugging us and pulling us in every direction against our will. And we try to stand against the current, but the current pushes us down. And the more we try to swim against it and resist the current, the harder the struggle becomes, and eventually it becomes noticeable to us that the current is too strong and the tide is too overwhelming. There's no way we can overcome. You been there? Author Ruth Harms Calkin describes this situation like this, and see if this resonates with you this morning. But she said, Lord, I'm drowning in a sea of perplexity. Waves of confusion crash over me. I'm too weak to shout for help. Either quiet the waves or lift me above them. It's too late to learn to swim. How many times have we felt those words? Facing a struggle that we know that we can't win ourselves, and we're fighting and we're striking and we're pushing and we're doing everything that we can think of to break free, to get out of this situation, to get unstuck until we realize that we're stuck with no way to get out on our own. And it's in these moments, if you've been there, it's in these moments that fear tries to invade our lives, isn't it? And we begin fearing everything. Fear what's next, fear what's going to happen, fear of being overcome. And oftentimes that fear leads us to fight even harder. But often to no avail. Yet in the middle of our fighting, in the middle of the battle, in the middle of the stream, the river pushing us away, in the middle of the struggle we face, the stuckness, I'm making that word up this morning, but in the middle of our stuckness, God offers these words. Psalm 46, verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. You may have heard this verse quoted several times. I'm sure you've heard someone say it at some point or other. You may have even seen it put on social media, on Facebook or Instagram or something, and you know, have those kind of pictures with the text on there, the verse on there. And typically speaking, when you see those pictures, what kind of pictures are you seeing behind the "Be still and know that I am God"? I mean, it's everything that's kind of peaceful, isn't it? I mean, you're seeing the picture of the picture-perfect beach. I mean, we've got unaltered sand out here and the bluest of waters. You're seeing a picture of a forest of trees that are standing strong and standing tall. And in the background, maybe there's a sun piercing through, and it's kind of that morning, you know, that beauty of the morning. Maybe you've seen it with a sky that is just full of an array of colors. We see this verse, we hear this verse, and oftentimes it's got this picture with it that everything is just calm and quiet and peaceful. And when we think about this verse, be still, know that I am God, we often think about that calm. I mean, we're thinking about, let's go out on the back porch tonight and as the sun sets and be still and know that He is God. Let's go out in the middle of the trees behind our house and just sit there and be still. I mean, we've got this, let's go out in the middle of the water and the lake and just take it easy, be still and know that He is God. But as we read this psalm, it's kind of the picture we have. But as we read the psalm, we see that what the people just faced, that the reason for the entire writing of this psalm was anything but calm and quiet and peaceful. In fact, as we read it, we can't miss a sense that there was just a mounting obstacle before them. A sense that the current was too strong, and the knowledge that we need something, we need help larger than what we can ever offer. We see the picture of like Charity trying to fight back against the river, trying to get back to her sons, but yet being pushed down over and over. Okay, that's kind of the picture of what we see when we look at this verse. Look at the context of the verse. Read this with me, if you will. We're going to read down through verse 9 right now. But beginning here in verse 1, this is what the psalmist says. It says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. He says, therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Selah. There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters His voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. Verse 8, come, behold the works of the Lord, how He has brought desolations on the earth. He makes war cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters a spear. He burns the chariots with fire. In 9 verses, I mean, there is so much to unpack in these verses. I mean, you could start off in verse 1. We could spend 3 or 4 weeks just in verse 1 of this chapter. There's so much in here. And maybe that's why you see, if you look twice throughout these 9 verses, you'll see that word Selah. Let's be honest, how many times when you read through the Psalms, you see the word Selah, you just, rush past it. You been there? How many of you don't even notice the word Selah is even in the Psalm? Been there before too. You know what you're doing when you rush past Selah? The exact thing you're not supposed to do when you get to the word Selah. You see, this word was originally this musical notation. It was a way of saying in this moment that we have to pause at this time. It was a pause of music for contemplation, to just think about what you just sung. So when you come to this word Selah here in a psalm, in any psalm, it's a way of saying pause and think about what you just read. The psalmist recognizes that much of what he says here is weighty, and it's so good that there needs to be pauses to consider the truths that are written. It's kind of like food for the stomach. Like you can only put so much in your mouth and chew on it, and you can only put so much in your stomach at a time to let it digest. I mean, that's kind of what the psalmist is saying here, that we're to chew on this, digest this, let this fill us. And we find that, and again, like I said, we find that richness, that depth right there in the first verse. I mean, he could have put Selah right after verse 1, which basically sets up the theme for the entire psalm. Again, we read, God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. As Warren Wiersbe points out, the word trouble here describes people who are in tight places, in a corner, and unable to get out. It's kind of backed up into a corner type situation. It's basically this picture of someone who is stuck. And as it turns out, that's really exactly what the psalmist probably felt before he wrote these words. In trouble, in tight places, put in a corner, unable to get out. We aren't exactly sure what led to the writing of this psalm. We don't even know who wrote it. But scholars have narrowed it down to one of two occasions. They're pretty well split on which one it would have been. But both of these bring about this sense of fear. If you're in the situation, bring about this sense of fear and this feeling of being stuck. But the two possible occasions, and you can go read these later on, but there are 2 Chronicles chapter 20 and 2 Chronicles chapter 32. So 2 Chronicles 20 and 32. In both places, though, Jerusalem is nearing a battle and the odds are stacked against them. In chapter 20, Jerusalem is being surrounded by three world powers. So three world powers have come together. They're ready to take on this holy city of Jerusalem. In fact, if you keep reading through the chapter, it seems like they're right there ready to strike the next day. Like they're going to be there. And so Jerusalem, I mean, they are backed into a corner at this time. In chapter 32, we see that 185,000 troops have now are coming upon Jerusalem. They're sitting here, this Assyrian army, they're sitting here waiting for the orders to charge. 185,000 people. Jerusalem, and by effect God's people, are in trouble. They're stuck. It's no wonder the psalmist paints the images that he does here. He speaks of earthquakes where the earth gives way and the mountains are being swallowed up by, picture that an entire mountain being swallowed up by the sea. He speaks of roaring waters and storms, of mountains that even tremble at its swelling. He speaks of nations raging and kingdoms tottering. And the point of all these images is simple. The psalmist sits here and he's looking at it, everything's coming, and he says, man, this is beyond my control. You ever try to stop a storm? I mean, I've seen ideas of nuking a hurricane or something here recently. I don't know if y'all have heard about that. Some dude down in Florida said we ought to be able to nuke them by now. It's 2019. I don't know what that would do. But I feel like it wouldn't stop a storm. I mean, we're powerless in the face of storms, aren't we? If you've ever been in a storm, I mean, that's what it feels like. Like you can't do anything against this. He's sitting here and he's saying, man, this is like an earthquake. That's good. I don't know if you've ever been I've never really been in an earthquake. I was in an earthquake when I was about 7 years old or something like that. You get the tremors or whatever that come through there. You ever been through one? I was about I said 7 years old. I think it was like 7th grade. This makes it more embarrassing for you. But anyways, so I'm sitting here and I'm in bed and it's late at night. It's like middle of the night, 3 in the morning or something like that. And I wake up and I just hear all this shaking. I'm thinking someone's pounding on my window. And so 7th grade, I jump up, run straight to Mom and Dad's bed, jump in the corner over there and say, y'all go figure it out. I'm going back to bed. Like, I mean, that's this shake. I don't know if you've been in an earthquake, but that shaking, there's nothing you can do. And they say that if you're in an earthquake, you're not even supposed to stay in the building because it could crash down upon you. So you're out there in the middle of the open and the earth's shaking and there's nothing you can do. But that's what the guy is saying, the psalmist is saying. He said, I'm stuck and there's nothing we can do. I don't know if you've ever been in that kind of situation before, and I'm not talking about a storm or something, but maybe you're in that battle this morning where everything you're facing is beyond your control. There's nothing that really you can do to fix the situation at hand. And as you stand before it, maybe it's an illness, maybe it's a work issue, a financial stress, a relationship problem, someone you love that things aren't going so well right now, or maybe it's this spiritual battle, this spiritual stagnation that you're facing. But whatever it is, it feels like the power of an earthquake, the roaring of a raging sea, and there's nothing you can do, and you feel like you're against the current, you're standing against the current, and in that moment, fear is the natural response, isn't it? What is going to happen? Yet the psalmist says in verse 2, though these things come, I will not what? Fear. And notice this morning he doesn't say if these things come. He says though these things come. There's this idea of a surety, like I'm going to face these battles at some point or another. And there's this assurity because the truth is we will face these battles. In John chapter 16, verse 33, Jesus Himself says, in the world you will have tribulation, you will face trouble. Like something is going to happen in life, and we're going to be standing against the current, we're going to be standing against the river, and there's nothing we can do. But even so, the psalmist says here, though all these things come, whenever they come, we will not fear. If fear is a natural response, if fear is what so often overwhelms us in times of trouble, why is this psalmist not afraid? And the answer again is right there in verse 1. The psalmist says, God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. In other words, in our times of trouble, when the battle begins raging and there's nothing we can do, he says God is our source of protection. He is our source of rest. He is our stronghold. He is the one who covers us and watches over us. He's a safe place for us to turn when our minds are weary and we feel heavy burden and our lives feel overwhelmed. And as we turn to Him, we find, as the psalmist says, we find that He is that very present help. In fact, when you go and read both occasions in 2 Chronicles 20 and 2 Chronicles 32, Judah's kings both turned to God, crying out for help, and help was exactly what they received. In miraculous ways, God protected, strengthened, helped these people. And that's what the bulk of this psalm discusses. If you look behind me this morning, I went ahead and highlighted every piece of this psalm throughout these 9 verses that shows us how God helped the psalmist in his time of need, in his time of trouble. As you'll see, that paragraph at the top basically talks about the situation they're facing. But the rest, that is most of the chapter, most of the verses right there talking about what God did for them. Most of the psalm. Psalmist says that he speaks, the earth melts. Psalmist says, he speaks and these enemies fall and the bows break and the spears shatter and the chariots burn. But the greatest news of all, verse 7 is spoken again in verse 11. He says, this Lord of hosts, this God who is our refuge and our strength and our very present help in a time of trouble, He says, He is with us. You see, as we said, we often fear when trouble hits. And it manifests itself in various forms, doesn't it? We fight back. We worry, we run, we complain, don't we complain? And sometimes, let's be honest, we break down and we even cry. And all of this is led by this fear inside of us. We see the trouble, we see we're stuck, and we fear there's no way out, no way through it. We fear we can't break free. And like charity, we fear we're going to be overtaken and overcome. And yet the psalmist says, my God, my refuge, my strength, my very present help. He's not just out there, floating in outer space, taking a morning jog around the solar system. He is with us. He says He's helping in the morning dawns. That's a picture of God fighting our battles in the morning. In this time period, when the morning dawn strikes, that's when war breaks out again, the battles start fighting. That's what He's saying. In the morning dawns, He's jumping up and He is fighting my battles. He is at war with me. He is at war for me. He's walking with me step for step. And you realize as Christians today, we have even greater hope of this. You may have heard the term at some point or another, Emmanuel, you heard it? That means God with us. Jesus. Jesus is the picture for us today that we aren't fighting these battles alone, that Jesus would come into this world and live with us. That is the earth-shattering truth, that He is with us at all times. And beyond that, when we even see Jesus say it in John 16, verse 7, obviously Jesus ain't here with us today, but even Jesus Himself said, nevertheless, I tell you the truth, He says, it's to your advantage that I leave and go away, for if I don't go, the Helper won't come to you. But if I go, I'm going to send Him to you. Like the psalmist is sitting here saying, the Lord is with us, but the psalmist didn't have the Holy Spirit within him, right? We have the Spirit living with us each and every day. Sometimes we're not really attuned to the Spirit living within us. But I'll assure you, in the middle of your battle, in the middle of whatever you're facing, the Spirit is with you, and the Spirit is fighting that same battle you're fighting. Shoot, He's even fighting it when you're asleep. He's facing the same struggles, the same trouble, the same stuckness that we face. But again, unfortunately, in the face of trouble, we often fail to recognize the God who is fighting for us, fighting with us, fighting in us. And when we don't recognize and we don't acknowledge and we don't turn to God in the face of trouble, whatever we're facing this morning, here's the bigger issue. We fight alone. Have you ever fought alone before? It's not great, is it? It's tough. It's brutal. We feel like we get pushed in that corner with no way out. And a lot of times, we lose. And maybe that's why God gives the command He gives to us in verse 10. Look at verse 10 for us, now that we kind of have the context of the psalm. Be still and know that I'm God. As the earthquakes rumble and as the mountains are swallowed up into the sea and as everything is fighting and tugging and pulling and pushing and doing all of these things, God says, be still and know that I'm God. He says, I will be exalted among the nations. I'll be exalted in the earth. And the Lord, and the psalmist comes back in, the Lord is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Up to this point, we don't know who's been writing this psalm. Again, it's some unnamed person out there that wrote it. But for the very first time throughout this entire psalm, in verse 10, we know exactly who is speaking. And for the first time in this psalm, God interjects. And in the face of danger, the face of trouble, the face of being stuck, we might imagine God would give us any, like if He's going to come in and say something to us, we might imagine He says, get up there and get back in the game, son, something like that. We might imagine He says, take charge, go after it, charge full steam ahead, take off, fight, hammer down, something like that, because that's typically what we do. But what does God say? Verse 10, what does God say? Be still. We'll get there, won't we? Be still and know that I am God. Be still is translated from the Hebrew word called rapa, which means to slacken, to let down, or cease. It's this picture of two people who are fighting one another until finally one of them decides, I'm not going to fight anymore, drops down the weapon and kind of waves the white flag and says, I'm done. Some of your translations might even kind of offer that idea. Some translations will actually say, stop fighting and know that I'm God. Others will say, cease striving and know that I'm God. It seems like an odd command to receive in a place of a battle, doesn't it? It seems so counterproductive. It seems so counterintuitive. Why on earth would God ever want me to stop fighting, to cease striving, to be still? Why in the middle of the battle? Why should I be still in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the chaos? Why be still when we're in the middle of it all and we're stuck with no place to go? Everything in us wants to keep pressing forward, doesn't it? Everything in us wants to run at 1,000 miles per hour. That's the speed we're used to going anyways. From the start of the alarm clock in the morning, we're rushing and we're fighting and we're moving, and we're running all day long. So as the battle comes upon us, it's just, another thing we got to face. And we fight that spiritual battle. As we fight it, our knee-jerk reaction is, I got to press on. I got to fight back. I can't stop, because if I stop, I'm losing ground. And it's kind of the idea that time is money, money is time. Like, that's kind of how we see it. If I stop right now, then it's going to overcome me, and I'm never going to overcome it, and I'm going to get behind. I can't get behind right now, so we push against the grain. We try to swim against the current, and we try to focus our attention on how we can overcome this situation, on how I can break free. And yet God says, be still. Stop. Stop talking. Stop communicating. Stop arguing. Stop commenting. Stop arguing. Stop fretting. Stop questioning. Stop complaining. He says, turn off the phone, turn off the computer, turn off the TV, turn off the distractions. Put yourself in a position where you can finally listen and be still. In the thick of the battle, whatever it is, be still. Because you see, in the running, our eyes are always focused on everything and everyone except God. But in the stillness, in our pause, when we stop and cease striving, that's the moment when we're finally able to reconnect with God, finally able to come back to God. And we can finally focus upon and look towards God. That's exactly what God is telling us here. Be still. And then He says, and know that I am God. He says, be still and focus upon God. Acknowledge Him, acknowledge His power, acknowledge His ability, acknowledge His sovereignty. And just to remind us of who God is, when we come to be still, like a good way to acknowledge who God is to listen to Him, is to read His Word. Sometimes we're really good at being still, aren't we? I mean, we fight between, but we like to find some time somewhere where we can be still just for a moment, don't we? I mean, we kind of like to relax. We like vacations for a reason, right? I mean, we go on vacation so we can put our toes in the sand and toes in the water and kick back and relax and try to get a break from everything. But God isn't saying just be still for the sake of being still. You know what vacations do when it's just a vacation, doing nothing at all? They wear you out, don't they? You've been worn out coming back from vacation before? Like your idea, and we talk about this a lot, I know, we're coming back to it. But the idea is like, I'm going to go on vacation here, and I'm going to kick back, and I'm going to relax, and you get back, and man, you are zapped, aren't you? We're still all week. But we might as well have been at work. We're tired. You see, the thing about it is, being still for the sake of being still doesn't help us whatsoever. I mean, we can be still all the time. We can be still and watch a ball game, listen to some music, sit around a fire, read a book, or even take a nap. We can be still in all of these. But in the face of troubles, God says, be still and acknowledge God. Listen to me. And the best way to listen to God is through His Word. And you want to know what we find when we actually be still, take a moment to get away from all the distractions, get away from everything that is speaking and shouting into our lives and the battles we're facing. You know what we do when we stop for a second and we be still and we get in God's Word and say, God, what do you have to say to me? You know what we find? So much good stuff. That's like the most anticlimactic answer that you've ever received, isn't it? But from cover to cover, we find one great thing after another. From cover to cover, we find that the God who created the heavens, the God who hung every star and every planet, the God who spoke us in everything into existence, the God who was with Joseph in prison, the God who parted the seas, the God who, marched through the wilderness and provided for His people, the God who killed a giant through a shepherd boy with a slingshot and a stone, the God who walked through the fiery furnaces with those three amigos, the God who shut the mouths of lions, the God who came to earth born of a virgin, the God who put on flesh to go through every trial we we now face, the God who hung on the cross for our sins, the God who died and rose again so that we can look forward to a place that has no more wars and pains and struggles and troubles, and the God who sent His Spirit to now dwell in us. We find that God, our God, is still fighting our battles, still walking with us step for step, still providing new mercies every single morning, still our refuge and our strength and our very present help in our times of trouble, still with us, still fighting for us. And we find that if our God is for us, nothing can be against us. So while we may not know the outcomes of the battle, that's okay. Some of you this morning are in a battle and you're thinking, I have no clue what's coming next. But here's the truth for you this morning. That's okay because we know the one who holds the outcome in His hand. We know the one who holds tomorrow, and we know the one who's going to work it all out. And while we may not overcome our battles entirely in this world, the good news is we can claim an eternal victory through our God who is our refuge, strength, and very present help. And knowing that, as Jesus says, gives us reason to take heart, reason to have hope. Because the rest of John chapter 16, verse 33, Jesus says, in this world you will have tribulations, you're going to face troubles, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So here's the truth for us this morning. If we are facing troubles, if we are facing battles, if we are up against these storms that have made us stuck, we have hope. Because the one who has overcome the world is fighting for us, fighting with us, fighting in us. And He says we need only be still and know that He is God. And if we need one word that defines what that looks like this morning, here it is for you. Surrender. Surrender. It's that idea of putting down the weapon and saying, waving your white flag and saying, I give up. Doesn't sound like something we ought to do in a fight, does it? Our minds and everything shows us that when you do that, like you're more likely going to lose. So we don't like surrendering. We don't like giving up control. We don't like giving up, whatever, and saying, okay, I'm not going to do it. We don't like surrendering for all these number of reasons because we like to grab it because we say, if I surrender here, then it's going to get out from under me and I can't fight it anymore. But God says, be still and know that I've got to surrender. Surrender control, surrender our grasp, surrender our plans, surrender everything to God and trust that He is with us, He is for us, He is in control. It's in this surrendering that we find the beauty of it all, and this is what Charity, as she flowed downstream, fighting against the current, came to realize. She said, I eventually looked back and I saw my boys, and they had already locked arms up with each other, and they're sitting there having the biggest old time they've ever had on that river, smiling and laughing and carrying on. And she said, I noticed in that moment, I can't do it all. I have to surrender. And while we can't do, here's the beauty, while we can't do it all, our God is bigger than any trouble or any chaos we now face, and He is able to overcome, in fact, already overcome. So we surrender and we trust in Him. And it's only in our surrendering to God that we find our refuge and our strength and our peace in our time of trouble. So as God commands us in the face of trouble, be still, cease striving, and know that I am God. In the face of a looming health diagnosis, God says, be still and know that He is God. In the face of a job loss or work troubles, whatever they may be still and know that He is God. In the face of financial stress, of school stress, of a relationship stress with someone you love, be still and know that He is God. He says, no matter how tough the tide turns, no matter how rapid the current flows, no matter how difficult, how strenuous or overwhelming it feels, surrender, be still, and know that He, our refuge, our strength, our very present help, is still God. And remember, as the psalmist reminds us that one more time in verse 11, no matter what troubles we're facing, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. No matter what you're facing, no matter how stuck you feel, you're not alone. For God is with us. Stop swimming against the current. stop fighting your battle alone. God is with you. God is for you. Just be still. Surrender. And know that He is God.